So we're going to start by looking at what resentment is. And then in preparation for an exercise we'll be doing a little bit later on, we're going to brainstorm some activities or some situations where we might find ourselves feeling resentment. We'll look at why we should let go of resentment, especially when it's actually so much more satisfying to hold on to it. We'll look at barriers to letting go of resentment. We're also going to look at how it could actually be harmful to rush ourselves or others towards forgiveness too soon. We'll cover some strategies for coping while you're, working through the process of forgiving, and then we're going to look at the process of letting go. We're going to finish with a little exercise called the Stone of Resentment, and I'll talk about that more later on, and then we're going to have time for questions. If you feel like you need to leave the room at any time, please just go, it's fine, don't need to raise your hand or anything, that's all good. If today's talk brings up anything painful for you, then please feel free to come talk to me later. You can talk to Mandy or you can talk to one of your ministry leaders as well. Oh, pointing at the wrong thing. Did that work?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so you should have the handout there. Does the handout include the number?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right. So that's the number that you text your questions to if you want to, or feel free to just ask at the end as well. So what is resentment? Well, it's quite complex. It's an emotional response. It arises from when you feel you've been wronged, treated unfairly, disrespected. It often involves a mix of anger, bitterness, frustration. It's typically due to a perceived injustice, an insult, mistreatment by someone else, a group, or even a situation. It can develop over time. If you feel like you're unable to express or resolve your anger, then all that negativity becomes internalised, can build into resentment. If it's left too long, it can become deeply ingrained and lead to lasting emotional distress, and it'll cause you to dwell on all the past wrongs, it'll harm your relationships, it'll impact your mental well-being. It can be associated with passive-aggressive behaviour, withdrawing, and as people harbour unresolved anger without expressing it directly, it will lead you to become quite isolated. So it is really important to address these feelings early to prevent deeper emotional distress and damage to relationships. So we're just going to have a little brainstorm now, and this will prepare ourselves for an activity later on. So just in your table groups, I'll give you sort of 5-6 minutes now to talk about what are some situations that might cause us to feel resentment. Are there actually any examples from your own life where you felt resentment? And then you should have paper on your table. Write your ideas on the paper or in the notes in your phone, and then we can share them with the rest of the group. Okay, so now we're going to talk about why we should let go of resentment. Why should we? It is so satisfying to hold on to it, but it's actually quite damaging. So we're going to start this with a quote from one of my favourite theologians. His name is Frederick Buechner, and this is what he says. He's talking about anger, but it relates. Of the 7 deadly sins, anger is possibly the most fun. To lick your wounds, to smack your lips over grievances long past, to roll over your tongue and prospect the bitter confrontation still to come, to savour to the last toothsome morsel both the pain you are given and the pain you are giving back. In many ways, it is a feast fit for a king. But the chief drawback is that what you are wolfing down is yourself. The skeleton at the feast is you. So if we choose to hold on to resentment, the only person that gets hurt is us. The other person, they might have gone on their merry way. They might not even know that we're angry at them, resentful of them, and meanwhile we're in pain. And it affects all areas of our life. It's going to affect our emotional, physical, spiritual well-being, and it can do so much damage to our relationships. Holding on to resentment is emotionally draining. It's a form of anger and bitterness. It keeps us in a negative mental state. It leads to stress, anxiety, depression. We can also spend a lot of time doing what's called ruminating, which is where we replay past hurts or wrongdoings. We find ourselves trapped in a cycle of negativity. It makes it hard for us to focus on the present, and it makes it hard for us to experience any happiness or joy. In regard to our physical health, holding on to resentment triggers the body's stress response, and that releases hormones like cortisol. Prolonged exposure to high cortisol levels can lead to issues like high blood pressure, weakened immune function, heart problems. It's also linked to conditions like headache, digestive problems, insomnia, and it's just going to take a toll on your overall health. There are also spiritual consequences.
The next slide.
Oh, yep, sorry. Yes, there we go. Forgot to move on, do that often. If we're harbouring resentment, we're actually going against Christ's call to forgiveness, which is found in Matthew 6:14 to 15. The promise that if we forgive others, God will forgive us. Holding on to past hurts makes it difficult to truly forgive others, and that hinders our relationship with God. It will rob us of our inner peace. But if we let go and forgive, if we open ourselves up to God's healing, then we can have a peace that surpasses all understanding that Paul talks about in Philippians 4:7. Also, if we look at Ephesians 4:26 to 27, that tells us, don't let the sun go down on your anger, because this gives the devil a foothold. So by choosing to forgive, we're not giving the devil that opportunity. What about our relationships? Resentment causes barriers between us and others. It leads us to mistrust people, avoid them. We can't engage in open communication. Over time, our close relationships will be eroded. Carrying resentment can make us isolated because we've hardened our hearts. We're not willing to let anyone in. We've been hurt. We don't want that to happen again. We've got to protect ourselves. And we don't want to be vulnerable or extend grace to others. Holding on to resentment also limits our personal growth. It keeps us stuck in the past. We're not able to move forward. We remain tethered to the hurt, and our emotional and spiritual growth is limited. And if we leave it unchecked, it can harden into bitterness, and that will taint all parts of our lives and sap our energy and joy. But if we do let go, we can experience freedom and healing. If we can choose forgiveness, we'll release that burden of resentment and create room for grace and allow God to work in our hearts to restore our peace and joy. So it's all kind of very well to say all this stuff, but when it comes down to it, there actually are going to be barriers to letting go. It can be challenging. There's psychological, emotional and spiritual barriers. Some of the common ones, people hold on to resentment because they feel an injustice was done to them. And if they let it go, that means the wrongdoer has gotten away with it. And we might be harbouring a desire for the offender to face the consequences, and then we'll be able to forgive. Letting go of resentment might feel like we're opening ourselves up to being hurt again. Holding on to it can act as a defence mechanism, and it protects us from further harm by keeping an emotional distance between us and the offender. Over time, people can begin to identify with their suffering and the role of being the wronged party. And this identity can be hard to release because it brings sympathy and gives a sense of moral superiority. So we may desire to stay in that position. If we have deep pain or trauma, and especially if we haven't properly processed it, that can make it difficult to forgive or let go of resentment. Sometimes the emotional wound is still raw and healing needs to take place before forgiveness is possible. Sometimes people confuse forgiveness with condoning or excusing behaviour. In a Christian context, it's important to emphasise that forgiveness doesn't mean that the action was okay, but rather that we're releasing the need for personal revenge or bitterness. Forgiveness is sometimes viewed as an emotional act, but biblically it is often an act of will and obedience. People may resist forgiving because they don't feel like it, they don't feel like forgiving, but it is a decision that will precede emotional healing. Pride can be a major barrier to letting go of resentment. The desire to be right or superior to the person who caused the offence can keep the resentment alive. And I'm just wondering, I might need to move on to the next slide. Let me see. Yep, there we go. We're caught up now. Resentment can give you a sense of control over the person who wronged you. By holding on to it, you might feel that you're retaining power, even though it's more harmful to you than to the other person. Actually, some cultures or family environments, holding grudges or resentment is normalised and expected, and it can feel unnatural or disloyal to move on from grievances. As Christians, we're called to forgive as God has forgiven us. When we're holding on to resentment, we might actually be feeling unwilling to trust God with the situation. He might not deal with it correctly. We might want to believe that we need to handle it ourselves instead of surrendering it over to God's judgment and grace. Often people struggle to let go of resentment because they can't see the situation from the offender's perspective. Empathy doesn't excuse the behaviour, but it can actually soften our hearts towards forgiveness. So as I mentioned earlier, it can actually be harmful to rush people to forgiveness. And so we're just going to go through a little bit now about why that is. Now, we've talked about reasons to let go because it's harmful to us, and what the barriers might be. But there is a danger in rushing ourselves or others to forgiveness. If we do this, it can deny emotional healing. Forgiveness is a process, something that takes time. We need time to process our pain, our betrayal, our hurt. Rushing ourselves or someone else to forgiveness before they've had a chance to fully experience and understand the emotions can lead to the feelings being suppressed rather than being dealt with in a healthy way. And it can cause unresolved anger, resentment, bitterness to fester. It can lead to a lack of accountability. So I'm not talking about taking revenge, but there might be some situations where there is an opportunity for the offender to take responsibility for their actions, and forgiving too quickly might allow the offender to avoid this. True forgiveness often comes after the wrongdoer acknowledges their fault and the one wronged has had time to express the pain that's been caused. So without this accountability, the forgiveness can feel superficial or unjust. Encouraging someone to forgive too quickly can actually minimise the pain that they've experienced. And we did, people did mention that in the causes of resentment, that, feeling dismissed, feeling invalidated, is about being minimised. If you're rushing someone to forgiveness, it can feel like you're being dismissed, you're being invalidated, your pain is not being heard. And that can send the message that your suffering isn't significant, or that you shouldn't be feeling hurt. that can make the wound deeper and make healing more difficult. Forgiveness is a process, takes time, and it involves internal work of processing emotions, coming to terms with what happened and making peace with it. It's a process that can't be rushed, and in some cases it might take a long time to reach the point of forgiveness. It can actually even be years in some situations. But if we end up skipping steps in the process, it might result in our forgiveness feeling forced, or it might be insincere. As Christians, forgiveness is meant to be a free and authentic act, and it's meant to mirror God's grace. If someone feels pressure to forgive prematurely, they might do so out of guilt or obligation rather than genuine grace. And that can just lead to further unresolved pain. If we rush to forgiveness, people may feel pressured to immediately reconcile or restore trust, even when they're emotionally ready. And you pointed that out for us earlier, that forgiving, you also need to exercise wisdom about entering into that relationship again, even once you've forgiven. Forcing quick forgiveness can blur the distinctions between forgiveness and having a relationship with the person, forgiving them versus having a relationship with them, not the same thing. And so there might be unrealistic expectations for the relationship to be repaired instantly, but that's also something that's going to take time. And forgiveness is a personal journey. Rushing it can hinder true healing, personal growth, and spiritual maturity, ultimately prolonging the pain rather than leading to genuine freedom and peace. So as we've said a number of times now, forgiveness is a process, something not to rush. It's going to take time. So what do we do with all of those confusing emotions? And what if the other person who's wronged us is someone we see at work every day, or they're a member of our family? How do we cope with daily life while allowing the inner work of our heart and soul to heal? So as we work through the process, we might find ourselves having all sorts of feelings. We might become irritable and lash out. We might feel stuck. Might have an inner conflict between wanting peace and wanting to protect ourselves. We can feel burdened. We might feel like we're on an emotional roller coaster. 1 minute we're fine, the next minute we're back down again, then we're fine again. We don't know where we are. We're all over the place. We might be preoccupied with thoughts of revenge. We might be feeling sad and grief over what we've lost. We might have lost a friendship, a relationship, and we're feeling we're having to process grief about that. We might feel restless, frustrated, and we might find as well when we're having conversations with other people, we keep bringing it up. We keep wanting to talk about it. We actually might find ourselves questioning God. We might feel spiritually disconnected. We might feel like a failure, become critical of ourselves. That might lead us to avoid times of self-reflection. We don't want to look inside too deeply because it hurts too much. It can also impact our productivity at work and our relationships. So there's a lot there that you might be going through. So here are some strategies to help make it through. So when the difficult feelings arise, it helps if you notice it and acknowledge it. I notice that I'm feeling sadness. And when you do that, try and be non-judgmental, like, oh my goodness, I'm feeling sadness again. It's to be expected. We don't need to be judgmental of ourselves in these situations. And also try and see yourself with compassion. There could be many feelings. There could be hurt, grief, anger. there's a saying that goes, that which we resist persists. So if we're avoiding, numbing or denying our feelings rather than noticing, acknowledging and processing, then we can't move beyond them and heal. An illustration I use with my clients is about holding a beach ball underwater. Has anyone ever tried to do that? So you can only hold it under for so long before it actually is going to pop up somewhere, and you never know where it's going to pop up, and it's going to make a big mess. That can illustrate how resentment can show up over time in an angry outburst. You've been trying to hold everything down, and you never know when it's actually going to, pop up and spill over. Sometimes the feelings might come up and it's not the right time or place. So someone who's wronged us might show up unexpectedly at a public event, and we feel angry and sad. In those times, if you notice the feelings, that's important, and then revisit it later with a tool such as journaling. Make a quick note on your phone. I was feeling this and need to process that later. Another thing that's good to notice is the thoughts and stories that we're telling ourselves about what happened. Are we ruminating, which I mentioned before? So that's where we deeply dwell on the thought and it goes round and round and round in our head like a loop. Are we catastrophizing about it? So that's where we jump to the worst possible conclusion about what's happened. If we're doing these things, it can help to shift our focus to something like exercise or hobbies. Who's got hobbies? I actually like colouring in. I like gardening. And it's great to get out, do some physical exercise. That can release a lot as well. We can also challenge our negative thoughts to see if they're realistic. So we look at the thought and we're like, okay, what's the evidence for that? What's the evidence against that? We might actually find that we're being a little bit unrealistic, and then we can actually reframe it into something a bit more positive. And we can reframe the situation from asking, why did this happen, to what can I learn from it? When we do feel flooded or overwhelmed with emotion, grounding techniques, breathing techniques or practicing mindfulness are all helpful. Does everyone know about grounding techniques, breathing techniques? Someone's shaking their head, no? A breathing technique that I give my client that everyone has said, yes, it's really helpful, they like it. It's called box breathing. And it's called box breathing because it has 4 sides to it. So, and you can do it in public and no one will know that you're doing it. So what we do with box breathing is, and we can just do it all now, we breathe in for 3, 1, 2, 3, and then we hold for 3, 1, 2, 3, and then we slowly breathe out for 3, 1, 2, 3, and then hold for 3 again, 2, 3, and run through that a few times until you've managed to calm yourself down. And everyone tells me it works, so that's a good one. Grounding techniques. Has anyone got any grounding techniques that they use? Okay, well there's a couple that I know of. If you're outside, or even if you're out in public or whatever, one that you can do is you focus on the furthest thing away, and then you gradually bring the focus until it comes back, till you're right here. And then there's another one called the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 technique. And I always get these in the wrong order, but it's like 5 things that you can hear, 4 things that you can see, 3 things that you can smell, 2 things that you can taste. What have I missed? And one thing that you can touch. You can actually do them in any order, but that's another one that people find really helpful. So again, moving on, staying with strategies, techniques that we can use, we might need to clarify in our mind what forgiveness means. So it doesn't mean forgetting or excusing the wrong. It's about freeing ourselves from the burden of bitterness. It's helpful to realise that we don't have to reconcile to forgive. And we also need to realise that forgiveness is not a one-time event. We might think we've forgiven and then the emotions flare up again and we're like, oh, what's going on? But that doesn't mean that we failed. We just need to try again and keep trying. We can use visualisation techniques where we imagine releasing the person and their offence. We can shift the focus away from what the other person deserves and toward our own emotional and spiritual well-being. And we ask ourselves, what can I do to take care of myself in this moment? Prayer and meditating on scripture can be really helpful. It's okay to have doubts and it's okay to take those to God. He's big enough to handle them. And if we find scriptures on forgiveness, surrender, healing and acceptance to meditate on, that's going to be really helpful. Also praying for the offender can soften our hearts towards them. That can also be another helpful thing to do. Forgiveness doesn't mean tolerating the harmful behaviour. And so if you want to feel safer in your forgiveness, you can set clear, firm boundaries with the person that's hurt you. And that's a tool to protect your well-being. It's not a barrier to forgiveness. It's not a barrier where we're deliberately trying to hurt the other person. Barriers are for ourselves, to protect ourselves. We might need to evaluate the relationship and reflect on whether it's worth continuing. If it's a repeated source of hurt, we might need to step away from it for a little while. It's okay to let go of relationships. If they're toxic or damaging, we can practice forgiveness at our own pace while we let that relationship go. Practicing gratitude can help us shift our focus from the pain of the past to the good in the present. Keep a gratitude journal. Has anyone done that? Yep. Yeah, I've done that. That's where you find 3 things each day that you're grateful for. And actually research shows that is actually really helpful for you and will help your mental well-being and help you come out of things like anxiety, depression. Exercise, creativity and hobbies are all helpful outlets for releasing pent-up emotions. Physical activity can be especially helpful in releasing stress and anger that might build up during the process. Lean on your community. Make sure you're surrounded by supportive people who will encourage your healing process. So I've got a wonderful group of people here that you can lean on if you need to. So it could be friendships, church communities, professional counselling if you need it. Having a network can make forgiveness feel less isolating. So we're now going to look at the process of letting go. Letting go of resentment can be deeply transformative. It involves emotional healing, spiritual reflection, and practical steps to release the negative feelings. So let's talk through those now. The first thing we need to do is recognise the resentment. We need to recognise that it exists. We can often have it lingering inside us and we're actually not fully aware of it. To assess this, we can look for subtle signs in our thoughts, feelings and behaviours. For example, are we having recurrent negative thoughts about the past, about specific people, specific events? If we feel triggered by something or someone, that can be a good clue. If we're thinking about certain situations or individuals and we start feeling bitterness or anger or frustration, that may point to a lingering resentment. Are we avoiding certain people or situations? Or are we withdrawing ourselves socially without there being a clear reason? Are we experiencing physical symptoms? such as stress, tension, headaches, fatigue, when we're thinking about certain people or situations. And finally, if we're struggling to forgive, replaying the offence in our mind or holding a grudge can indicate that the resentment is still present. So then we need to examine the source, identify what or who is causing the resentment. Is it tied to a particular person, situation or event? And then spend some time reflecting on the root cause. And we need to understand the impact of the resentment. It can be emotionally exhausting, consuming our mental energy and our joy. From a Christian perspective, it can block our connection to God's grace. As we've said before, Matthew 6:14-15 teaches if we want to receive forgiveness from God, we need to extend that forgiveness to others. And as C.S. Lewis says, to be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. Prolonged resentment has also been shown to contribute to stress, anxiety, and even physical ailments. So we can see why it is important to let go. And then we actually need to decide to let go. We need to make a conscious choice. It's a deliberate choice. And you need to decide that holding on to it is no longer beneficial. And we need to choose freedom over being in bondage to our resentment. As Galatians 5:1 says, it is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Resentment can feel like bondage, and letting go is part of living in the freedom that Christ provides. The fourth thing that we need to do is seek God's help to forgive by praying for strength. Ask God to help you let go of the pain. Forgiveness, it doesn't come naturally to us, but prayer can help soften our hearts. We need to reflect on Jesus' words on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. So that's an example of radical forgiveness that offers us a model to follow. And a big one here is relying on grace. Understanding that forgiveness is not always immediate and it may take time, but God's grace will empower us to forgive. The next thing we need to do is try and have empathy and change our perspective. We need to see others as God sees them. Consider the other person's flaws and humanity. And so empathy can come when we understand that people act out of their own brokenness and pain. There's a saying, hurt people hurt people. And we need to shift our perspective. Romans 12:8 says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Shifting from a focus on the offence to a focus on peace can change our outlook. The next thing we need to do is release control. Let go of our need for revenge or justice. Because resentment's often tied to a desire for control or a desire for revenge. So letting go means trusting God with the outcome, knowing that vengeance belongs to Him, as it says in Romans 12:19. And we need to trust in God's justice. Trust that God is just and will deal with wrongs, and that can help us surrender our desire to seek our own justice. So step 7 is practical acts of forgiveness that you can do. So a powerful act is to pray for the person who's wronged you, and that can help you release resentment and see them in a new light. And then trying an act of kindness. Sometimes doing something kind for another person can cause a shift in your heart from resentment to love. And step 8 is healing and rebuilding. So healing from resentment is going to take time, but as you forgive and let go, you'll notice a lighter emotional burden. Having boundaries, forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation or returning to a harmful relationship. Healthy boundaries can be important in some cases. And finally, celebrating the freedom that comes from letting go of resentment. And that can open your heart to love, peace, and deeper spiritual growth. So we're going to have another brainstorm now in your tables, and then we'll do it in our tables for a few minutes, and then we can share again. Don't know if I'll write these on the whiteboard, they're not as necessary, but what I want now are some examples you can think of from the Bible where people could have chosen to harbour resentment, but they've chosen to let go of resentment and they've chosen forgiveness. Now, I've done a lot of talking today, and you're probably not going to remember most of what I've said, so I thought if I just give you a few quotes and sayings, they might stick in your head a bit more than the rest of my blabbing on. So, my favourite one, resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. It makes sense though, doesn't it? When we think about it, it really makes sense. One from Pope Francis. Resentment is like a fly in a closed room that keeps buzzing and leaves us restless, worn out and unable to find peace. Corrie ten Boom. So much reason for her to hold resentment, but she said forgiveness is setting the prisoner free, only to find out that the prisoner was me. Resentment is like taking a bath in dirty water. It feels good at first, but you just get dirtier. Resentment is the one thing that eats its own container. And we'll finish with a Chinese proverb that says, "He who seeks revenge should dig two graves." So we're going to finish soon and move on to an experiential exercise. First, before we do that, I just want to read out a poem. It's called "The Wisdom of Letting Go." It's by a lady called Mariam Merriam. And I have it on the slide. Oh, there it is. Be like a tree and let the old leaves fall. In their fading, find wisdom for us all. To cling too tightly brings sorrow and pain, but in letting go, there's so much to gain. The past may weigh heavy, but it's not ours to keep. Release it gently and your soul will sleep deep. Like branches stretching toward the sky, we grow when we're unafraid to say goodbye. For every leaf that drops, new buds appear. Change is a cycle we needn't fear. In shedding the weight of what's no longer true, we make space for the light, for growth that's new. Let go of regret, let go of fear. In every ending, fresh beginnings are near. Like the tree in winter, stripped bare and cold, know that in time new stories unfold. In life we learn not all can remain, but through each loss we break free from the chain. The winds may blow, the storms may roar, yet by letting go we stand even more. Hold on to hope, not the things that must fade. In this lesson the path of peace is laid. For the leaves that drop will nourish the ground, and in their falling true strength is found. So we're going to do an experiential activity now, and it's called the Stone of Resentment. So what I want everyone to do is come up to the front and grab a stone and a marker. We've got our causes of resentment over there. What we need you to do is think about a person or a situation that has caused you resentment. So close your eyes now. Think about someone or something that you're holding resentment towards. reflect how the resentment feels in your body. Is there a tension? Is there a tightness? Is there a heaviness? And silently just acknowledge those emotions. And I'll give you a few minutes now just to sit with that. Okay. As you're ready, I'll invite you to come up, grab a stone and a marker. And what I want you to do is to write a word or a phrase on the stone. It could be the name of a person, could be an event, or it could even be a feeling like anger or betrayal. And you can find your own space if you need to write that. Just as you're ready, come up and help yourselves. Okay. So now what I want you to do, just one by one, is come up and drop the stone into the water, and that's going to symbolise the release of your resentment. And as you do that, consciously visualise the letting go as you watch the stone sink into the water. So just one by one, come up. So is anyone feeling the urge to come back and pick up their stone?
Who said that?
Because I think you noticed my secret trick, that I deliberately chose textures that would wash off in water. And what this symbolises to us is our resentment has been washed away. And in the same way, God has washed away all of our sin, our resentment, our unforgiveness, and He's forgiven us. And so if God's done that for us, surely we want to walk in the same freedom today. So as you go back into your daily life, and as you encounter that person or that scenario that caused your resentment in the first place, I want you to think about how that's going to feel. What will you do differently now that you've let go of the resentment? And sit with that image. And think about what you need from God to make that happen as well, and ask Him for that. And we've now reached the end of my presentation, so thank you all so much for coming. I've really enjoyed spending the afternoon with you, and does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Yep. Cool. Did you?
Sorry, I need to dry my hand.
Can we ask for electric version of PPT?
Of the PowerPoint?
Oh yeah.
You send them an email. So like
Yeah. Do we
Share the PPT one in an email.
Yes,
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine with me. So I think if you email these guys, they'll be able to do that for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on one of the things you talked about was rushing forgiveness.
Yes.
But what's the balance between saying, oh, I don't want to rush the forgiveness, as opposed to then holding on to the resentment? Because I think there must be a line, right? Like, yeah. And talking about even if you rush, like rushing might still feel like you're rushing even after years. That's quite a long time. So then, yeah, when can you say like, oh, I've actually got resentment and bitterness, and I'm holding on to that, as opposed to just holding off on, just waiting for the forgiveness part to come.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And you're right, it is a balance, but I think hopefully you would know in yourself when you're ready. It's something that you could put a lot of prayer into, and also when you notice the effect it's having on your health. If you're starting to, feel like, depression, anxiety, stress, all of those sorts of things, if you started to think about how it's affecting you, then you probably go, okay, I think I need to forgive now because this is not good.
Any more questions?
My question is, how do you view confrontation?
Me, I run away.
Because yes, I mean, there are not, some people they believe in confrontation, and some people they just like, they can't take and they think that we're sweeping it under the carpet. So where is the line there? For me, it's a little bit tricky.
Yeah, look, confrontation is really difficult and some people find it really hard. And then some people are fully willing to, get in there and let's talk this out, and you might not be ready. I think in that situation, just having boundaries, but remaining calm. If someone wants to have a confrontation with you, then they need to respect that you both need to be ready for that. And yeah, you might not be ready straight away. It might need to, wait for a couple of days or something until you've processed everything, time to talk it out. But yeah, am I answering your question or am I making it worse?
I think the trick is there's one, the party is not for confrontation and the other party is for confrontation. So that's where the clash comes in. So if the party is for confrontation and the other party is never ready for confrontation, I'm one of those who's never ready for confrontation, and the other party will think that we are just sweeping everything under the carpet. You see, so that's where the clash comes in, and it's difficult.
Yeah, and different personality styles, like you say, some people are going to be ready for it, some people are never going to be ready for it. But I think that it's really important to not necessarily have a confrontation, but to talk things out at some point. Doesn't have to be a confrontation. You both remain calm and talk calmly to each other. But sweeping it under the carpet is what's going to lead to the resentment, because you're there thinking, we've never dealt with it, we've never dealt with it, we've never dealt with it, and just some open, honest communication can go a long way, as I always say to the couples that I counsel. So does that help? Yeah. Yes. Anyone else have a question?
We have a question over here.
Hi. My question is because I've got two family members they're actually resenting each other. So they're non-believers. So for me, how do I help them as a Christian?
Yeah, good question and very tricky. I think, they're non-believers, you are a believer, probably the best thing that you can do is pray for them. But
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, sitting and listening to them talk about it, but then also encouraging them to forgive. Forgiveness is not just for people who are Christians. Like, forgiveness everybody can work on forgiveness, and so you could actually even tell them some of the things. Well, if you hold on to this, it's going to have this negative effect on you. Tell them about that, and see if that leads them a bit more towards forgiveness. But families are very complex. And there's a lot of conflict. So yeah, I would encourage you to pray for them, and be prepared to listen to them and encourage them in the process. Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions on the floor? Before we did have a few questions come in via text message as well.
Yep.
Cool. So the first question was, how do I forgive myself for sin, even though other people have told me that God has already forgiven me?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and it's very difficult because we know that God has forgiven us for that sin. He's washed it away, but it kind of feels like no amount of telling yourself that or other people telling you that is working. You do have on your handout, I think, we would go through the steps of forgiveness. Work through those with yourself as many times as you need to. It's not going to be a one-time event. It might keep coming up again. But yeah, that in here somewhere. Oh, the process of probably using the process of letting go. And you know, sort of doing that on yourself. And forgiving yourself is really hard to do. We're very, very hard on ourselves. We're our own worst critic. And, you know, we give other people way more grace than we give ourselves. So, you know, practice a bit of self-compassion and, you know, work through the steps as many times as you need to.
Fantastic. This question was similar to Sandra's, so I'm just going to summarize it. How can we practice healthy boundaries and not rush forgiveness when these actions can harm other people too? Is there biblical wisdom that can guide us?
Sorry, there was a lot in that question. I got a bit lost.
So I think the person's getting at how can we establish healthy boundaries while not rushing forgiveness?
Yeah.
That's the first part, and then the second part is there biblical wisdom that can guide us?
I think so. We kind of covered already about the line between, you know, like not rushing forgiveness and having resentment, whatever. Now I'm thinking biblical wisdom. Well, they talked about healthy boundaries, and one thing I always think about is that Jesus had great boundaries. Wherever he went, the crowds followed him, and he took compassion on them, but he also withdrew when he needed to. And so, you know, kind of withdrawing yourself and for a time of kind of rest is also really important.
With Peter, stay away from Satan.
Oh, yeah, get behind me, Satan. Yeah. Sorry, didn't come prepared with thoughts about boundaries, so I kind of haven't got any, but I can think about it and email you.
Yeah, no, cool. Thanks for that. Another person, I'm just going to summarize them a bit, paraphrase them, some of the questions. So another person has asked, when is it right or the wise timing when the situation, including self-readiness, to rebuke? I know it kind of seems a bit off topic, but
yeah. So is what we're asking? Is there ever a time for us to rebuke?
Yeah.
The person who's done the wrong thing?
Yes, I get.
Confront. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And you know, be prepared to have an open and honest conversation with them about what happened, how it affected you, and listen to them. And you know, ask them, how is this affecting you? Yeah, I'm sorry. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. No, I think that's right. That's just like case by case.
Yes.
Basis. Yeah. Cool. So someone else has asked, with narcissism, without reconciliation, what can one do instead of reconciliation? How does one know that they have forgiven the abuser?
Yeah, with narcissism it's really difficult, and I think in most cases that would be a situation where you may need to step away from that relationship, because to speak in general terms, a narcissist is probably never going to take responsibility for what they did, and they're also going to continue hurting you. So you probably need to step away from that relationship, but then do your own work on the forgiveness in your own time.
Yeah, fantastic. So someone else has asked, Why do I tend to still feel the same negative feelings and cannot reach forgiveness even though I've acknowledged the resentment, set boundaries, and avoid the situation? Is there maybe something missing in the process?
Yeah, it's tricky, but also remembering that forgiveness is not a one-time process, and we do need to do it over and again. But I honestly think that a lot of prayer in the process is going to be what really helps you. If you find that you feel like, oh yes, I've forgiven and I've let it go, and then oh, it comes back up again and whatever, it's something that you really need to take to God and ask for His grace to help you work through it.
Yeah, so like forgiveness is a process that we keep doing.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Another person has asked to clarify what actions, boundaries, and what if those actions, boundaries, and withdrawing hurt other people as well? If there's time to ask. Yes.
That's a very tricky question because I think I was just talking about may need to remove yourself from the relationship, the situation, and then that hurts other people. And I think, again, that would be a case-by-case basis, and only you are going to be able to decide what to do in that situation. And but I personally think that there are times, especially with narcissism, where you need to put yourself first and take the steps that you need to take for your own emotional, mental, physical well-being. Yeah, for sure. The last question that we had is, should forgiveness be conditional on the repentance of the perpetrator? No, it can't be. It can't be, because you're going to have so many situations where the perpetrator is not going to repent. The forgiveness is something that you do for yourself. It's not something that you do for the other person. So you can't wait for them to repent and then you go, okay, now I can forgive. You need to do it outside of whatever that person does. And it's something that you do for yourself.
Awesome. So I think that was the last question that we had. Unless there's anyone else on the floor that has a question.
We finished early?
No? We finished early. Fantastic. Thanks again. That was fantastic. We do have something small to thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me, everybody.